Hey everyone, it's Erica. How are you today? So, this video is basically an introduction to mindfulness. If you've already experienced or heard about mindfulness, it's also a nice refresher just to come back to some conversation, some explanation about the practice of mindfulness. So, here's the thing, the common misconception about mindfulness is that it is about getting calm, being at ease, and being peaceful. Now, I always say I have like a bad for business statement. I'll just kick off with it, right? It's not about that. That might happen. Because of the practice, you may experience in your life a bit more peace, a bit more calm, a bit more ease. Uh, but that's not the goal. So when I describe what mindfulness is, and there are many definitions of it, I take it from the learning I've done through Brown University for the mindfulness-based stress reduction. What I learned in mindfulness-based stress reduction is that when we can get to know all of our feelings, then we have a better way, a better chance of managing our stress. You know, the practice of mindfulness is becoming aware of what's going on inside and what's going on outside. When I started practicing, I started noticing how busy my mind was. Until I got quiet, I didn't necessarily realize that. I started to notice that my thoughts created a lot of stress and anxiety for me, the rumination of that. I began to notice as the awareness of my thinking came into place that how I thought impacted how I felt. You probably know that about yourself or can maybe pause to reflect on that. Actually, let's do that. In just a moment, I will have you pause the video. And in that pause, if you're watching this with someone, you can have a discussion. If you're watching it alone, it can just be a quiet reflection or even written, and then just start the video back up when you're ready. Don't pause yet. This is what I want you to reflect on. I want you to reflect on how aware you are moment by moment of what you're thinking about and how those thoughts make you feel. So, kind of moment by moment, how aware are you of two things? What you're thinking about, and then the impact that those thoughts have on how you're feeling. Okay, hit pause and start it again when you're ready. So hopefully you had an opportunity to maybe gain just a little bit of insight on how your thoughts make you feel. You might even have noticed or talked about or written about or reflected on what types of thoughts you have. What I mean by that is I have thoughts that are constantly planning thoughts and worrying thoughts. Like I catastrophize things, worst case scenario thinking. Obviously, when you bring your body into constant worst case scenario, you're like just messing up the nervous system, right? It's constantly going into a place where it thinks it has to protect you from something. So that doesn't sound calm and peaceful, right? That's why I like to kind of kick off with this, because you might sit down to practice mindfulness in the formal practice of mindfulness. So the formal practice of mindfulness is seated meditation, walking meditation, there's loving kindness meditation, there's body scan, there's all these formal practices. Because what that means is that when you practice something, you make an intention to sit and practice it, it begins to integrate itself into how we live. It just makes sense. So all of a sudden, you might notice more awareness when you're not necessarily sitting down to meditate, but just when you're interacting in your life alone or with others. Anyway, what I wanted to really kind of hit on is this idea that until I was aware of my thoughts, I didn't understand how they impacted how I was feeling. So if I'm constantly planning, while that might give me some comfort, it also keeps me one step ahead. And there's a little bit of anxiousness around that. Did I plan the right way? Is it the right schedule? Could I have done it this way? all sorts of things go along with that. When I can interrupt the rumination of those thoughts with a pause, with a breath, with a listening, just with this opportunity to get out of my thinking brain, then I can start to ease that nervous system. So like I said, we might over time find more of a pathway to ease and calm and peacefulness. But the practice itself can feel kind of messy, especially if when you sit down to practice, the silence is uncomfortable. I talk a lot about getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And I know that that might be like my second like bad for business comment, because mindfulness, the practice of it, gets us in touch with how we're feeling, what we're thinking, the sensations of our body. And those sometimes might not always be pleasant, but they don't have to hijack everything and shut it all down. Mindfulness for me has become a way of engaging in my life and all of my life, in all of my emotions, in all of my feelings. Became a way of recognizing that when I was very critical of myself, I wasn't very nice to myself, it didn't feel good. That's where a compassion practice comes in. And typically when I was that way, I also didn't engage with others from a space that was kind or compassionate, or oftentimes even all that rational. I'm sure that you're not unlike me, or I'm not unlike you, in the fact that our thoughts can run away with this big storyline that we create. You know, how often have you worked yourself up into this like thought process of like, oh, this person hates me. Oh, I did this wrong. Oh, I can't do anything right. Oh, they don't this. Oh, they don't that. Only to find out that it's not true. I share this a lot, that it feels very real, but it's not necessarily true. So the practice of mindfulness does sometimes look like formally sitting on a cushion, right? Sitting on the floor and noticing the fact that you're breathing or listening to the sounds around you. You know, what you practice becomes stronger, neuroplasticity. And what we know is that if we can shift our brain away from the pattern that it has of always, always, always engaging in thinking unconsciously, right? Because there's times that you want to consciously sit down, think, brainstorm, work. But if you can practice giving your attention to something other than that, you create pathways in the brain that cease that constant rumination. I'm going to ask you again to pause the video in just a moment. And what I want you to do is I want you to either talk about, write about, or just reflect on how do your thoughts stress you out? Like, what do you know about your patterns of thinking that actually causes you unnecessary stress? Okay, go ahead, hit pause. All right, thanks for taking that little break. Some of these reflections don't feel very good because the more we think about it, the more stressed out our body feels. It's like perceived stress. We think we're in danger. We think that. If you took the time, like I suggested, to really start to notice that, it's just all awareness. And logic would say that if these thoughts make me feel this way, then it might make sense to practice taking my attention off of those thoughts. But here's the other piece, because it's not about avoidance. It's also when you get into a space where there's great discomfort, where there really are the feelings of fear or shame, anger, and all of those feelings, you know, are healthy and fine to have. But can you be with those feelings? That's what the practice also is about. You know, recalling a time right now, let's do that. Just recall a time when you were agitated. Nothing too big of a deal, but just a time when you were, agitated. I've got one and I feel my heart racing. But if I constantly try to fight it and bat it away, then I'm never like teaching my nervous system how to deal with agitation. That's what the practice also has done for me. that I can be uncomfortable and still stay engaged in life. I can be agitated and not have it shut everything down. So the practice of mindfulness gives us an opportunity to be aware of our thoughts, become aware of our feelings, notice the sensations of our body so that we can live more fully, not just from this mind that tells so many crazy stories and gets us so worked up. It's really important to understand that mindfulness means presence of heart. And when we live our lives from this space, from this body, more from this space, we're just more integrated and engaged in it. So mindfulness isn't all about calm and peace and happiness. It's about living the fullness of all of the emotions. It's about becoming aware of our judgments and how our judgments cloud the way we think of ourselves and how we interact with others. It's intentional living, on purpose, deliberate, slowing down at times to really listen, to notice what's distracting us, what's getting in the way of us being here. And maybe what's getting in the way of us being here, we have to address and take care of. So there comes that self-care. Or maybe it's just a story and we need to learn how to intercept the story so we can come into the fullness of the life that's right here now. Thank you so much for joining me.